All right, here goes nothing. Remember, all of this can be found on Kohanum Web. So this is my first attempt to do a sort of vision board online. So I'm going to go over how I understand F. Scott Fitzgerald and the American Dream, and kind of how we as students and as people view the American dream as this big thematic concept, and how we can use that motif as a way to understand American literature, which is important, especially if we're talking about the sort of cultural aspects of American literature. You know, I know that right now there's a big scary conversation about, what makes American literature. And I told my kids in class, if I were to ever get fired for teaching a book, it would be Gatsby. Gatsby is the book that could potentially get me fired, because the way that we view what it means to be an American is very controversial. And it's always been very controversial, but right now it's super controversial, like the way that we see the representation. If I say the American flag to you, you have a very distinct knowledge in your personal background of what the American flag means to you. And so when a literature teacher is exposing you to different aspects of how people view American culture and the arguments therein, that can be a very dangerous place for an American literature teacher. I choose to take those risks, and I think that they're important risks to take, because I want my students to self-actualize, in that I want them to be able to figure out what that means to them. It doesn't necessarily have to be what they've always known to be true. They can think of the idea of the American dream in their own particular way. And it doesn't have to be something that is in a state of stasis either. When we talk about what it means to be an American, how we draw those parallels, and how important those things are to us, and what is important as far as being an American. It's a dangerous time to be a teacher right now. I'm aware of that. But again, I think that it's important that we explore these ideas. So, talking about the idea of the American dream as a motif, and talking about the idea of the American dream as an entry point into The Great Gatsby. So I always sort of start this process the same way. I tell the kids, okay, if we're going to look at the idea of the themes in this novel through the motif of the American dream, tell me what that means to you. What is the term American dream? What does it mean to you? And inevitably, they sort of all come up to the same conclusion. It's said in different ways, and that is, if you work hard and you do what you're supposed to do in life, you will reach some sort of modicum of success. And when we talk about that, the work aspect of it, they immediately associate with money. If I ask them clarifying questions and I say, okay, but what does that look like in the end? Like if I were to question you further, you say success. What does the word success mean? If I said, sit down and draw what success means, they will sort of inevitably sit down and say, okay, well, success means that you have the freedom to maybe have your own land, maybe you've got your own house, you can have a car, you've got a job that you enjoy, maybe you've got some animals or something like that. But they all sort of go to the same idea, and that is that the American dream's construct of what it means to be successful is happiness, but a very distinctive type of happiness. For them, the happiness, the hard work leads to happiness equals stability. It equals a house and a car and a job that you enjoy. And that, for them, is the American dream. What's really cool to watch is through this process of them sort of tooling out, the bigger aspects of what the American dream is, they start to question each other. They start to say, yeah, but, not everyone has access to this, or not everyone can, go to good schools like we do. And not everyone, sees the house and all of those things as being what the American dream is. For some of my kids, it's to travel. For some of my kids, it's to learn all of the things. So their construct of what success is begins to kind of fall apart a little bit, and then they get frustrated, which I know they hate, but I love, because that frustration to me goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the year. And my former kids will always say it goes back to the cave, right? But it does. It goes back to Plato's Allegory of the cave. Once you stop categorizing things in these very easy places like success is this, happiness is this, and you have to start looking at yourself linguistically and say, this isn't actually what I thought it was. This was something different for me. Once you start doing that, the kids get frustrated, which is just a sign of them coming out of that Plato's allegory of the cave. That's the thing about the cave itself. The cave in Plato's allegory of the cave represents ignorance. And that ignorance is a place of comfort. It is warm. It's where you have all of the knowledge. And you can name the shadows on the wall and you can say, these are the real things. This is success. This is American. This is, hard work. This is what all of those things mean. But once you start questioning them, as Socrates, I'm sure, would prefer, once you start questioning them, that whole construct of success, it becomes really overwhelming and kind of painful. And that's what Plato's allegory of the cave describes, is that, you walk out of this dark cave where you knew all of the things and you see this bright light of day. And that bright light of day, it's legitimately bright, right? It comes down and it takes, I think it's Glaucon is the guy from Plato's allegory of the cave. It takes us by surprise and it makes your eyes hurt, right? So having these conversations in American literature about how we define the American dream, and obviously through the vehicle of Fitzgerald, how does Fitzgerald define the American dream? It can be painful and it can make you uncomfortable. And again, this is why I think that when it comes to having my job, which is to talk about knowledge and how we acquire knowledge through literature, Gatsby is one of those books that's really dangerous, right? Because the kids come into it thinking one thing and then they get their knowledge and they kind of go, ow, no, wait, that's not what I had envisioned at all. That's not what I had thought at all. And I try to explain to them that it is the pendulum swing of American literature. It's that movement, that constant desire to actually get out of the cave of ignorance. We as Americans, I think one of the most beautiful things about this country is that we as Americans strive pretty darn consistently to make sure that we are trying to get out of the cave of ignorance, that we are not moving constantly in a place of comfort. And that can be very disruptive and it can be very uncomfortable, but it is debate and deliberation that stir the soul of democracy. And that pendulum swing of American literature reflects that. It shows that, there were people in our culture who said, okay, we finally got it right. We finally got it right. And then there were other people who came along and started questioning it. And suddenly we realized, no, actually, we don't have it right. It's not what we thought. But when you have kids read literature, especially, really important classic literature like The Great Gatsby, when they have those realizations, they can be quite painful and confronting to them. And I tell them that it's very, very important for them to rebel against those ideas. Like if you have an idea about one of these things and you read something by a different author and it disagrees with your idea, you don't have to agree with what the author says. What you need to understand is that the author is giving you a representation of what society has learned to do at the time to get better. That's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to reveal to you, hey, everyone thought it was this way, but we have actually found that it's more along this way, right? So the pendulum swing is everyone trying to get better, and that really is what the literary movements represent. They're supposed to be these philosophical movements, or the manifestations of the philosophical movements of us getting out of the cave, and it can be uncomfortable. But ultimately, that's my job, to make you look, even if you don't want to look at the Enlightenment. That's the epiphany of these American literary movements, well, any literary movement, any philosophical movement for that matter, is that it helps us get rid of those chains. At some point in time, our society thought that slavery was an okay thing. At some point in time, our society thought that, not everyone needs the right to vote, and then we said, oh, wait, look at that. I think we should allow everyone to have the right to vote, everyone does deserve that right if we are an equal society. And art and literature and philosophy helped us understand that, the grass can be greener and we can make things better if we actually try. And maybe that's a bit of a cheap shot for me to kind of pull into their idealism. But at the same time, I make sure as I'm teaching these novels that I explain to them Please don't believe everything that you hear, everything that you read. You know, my job is not ever, ever, ever to have you know what I think. I don't want you to know what I think. I want to hear what you think, and I want you to be able to read these arguments and have an opinion on them, right? When you're reading Gatsby, I want you to read Gatsby and say to yourself, you know what, this is an argument that this guy had during his time period. Here are the historical aspects of that time period. Some of it relates to me, and some of it doesn't relate to me. You know, the whole idea of money equaling success, well, obviously the entry point of this conversation is the idea of the American dream. And for most of us, the American dream does have money tied to it. You know, and so there is that aspect of it. So when you're reading Gatsby, if you start feeling kind of inundated with all of this like money argument, your job isn't to read that and go, oh yes, well, of course I agree with F. Scott Fitzgerald, because there are a whole bunch of different nuances that exist for you and your family and your understanding and your value set. And so it's important for you to look at that and go, wow, you know what? That's a lot of argument, but I don't have to feel that way. You know, also, what about me? What about this? What about what I think? Isn't that also just as important and just as valid? And I tell my kids, absolutely. You know, that's the beauty of books that are really great, is it brings in this whole idea of the Proustian metaphor where the book doesn't exist by itself. It's your American dream. It's your idea of what success is. It's your idea of how you understand the world around you. And that's what makes this literature great, is it causes you to feel something about that. And then you can have an opinion and form your own opinion. What you can't do is stay in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, even though it's very, you know, it's very a wonderful, warm place where you feel, you know, very connected. Now's the time to move out of that cave. So that really is the beauty of my job, is that I can teach them the skills that they need to read a book like Gatsby and pick it apart and put their own opinion in it. You know, you don't have to read something or consume some piece of media, whether it's a novel or a film or a video game or a TikTok or whatever it is that you want to watch, and just have it exist and then you be influenced by it, not be able to speak back. You know, so I teach them how to annotate. You know, I say, hey, go through the book and find all the aspects of nihilism that you can find, right? When you see nihilism, you know, put a little post-it down, right? Go through the book and see all of the aspects of like the Proustian metaphor, right? Your understanding of time and self and identity and how it expands. You know, what about the feminist critique? If you wanted to approach this book with a feminist lens, here are the ways that you approach the book with a feminist lens. And that's kind of the beauty of my job, is that I get to teach these young people how to consume this amazing literature, but not just consume it in a passive way. Read it and then understand this is an argument about capitalism. This is an argument F. Scott Fitzgerald made about capitalism. But just because you're reading it doesn't mean you have to believe in it or all of it or parts of it. And that's kind of the most amazing part of literature, is it doesn't exist without you. Yeah, so that's how I introduce Gatsby. I basically give the kids an entry point for them to connect it to themselves, their world, and I emphasize that their opinion matters, you know, when it comes to this book. All right, so that was me trying something new. I think I'm gonna get better. It definitely took me a lot longer to edit the finished product afterwards, so I think once I start getting more used to recording while I'm talking, it'll get easier. It's definitely, I think I need some better video editing software to help speed things up in certain places and slow things down in other places. And I might end up just creating the entire board itself and then just sort of talking through it. But I think that there's something to be said for like watching someone draw, that aspect of watching someone create things, that creative part of it. I think that that's also really interesting. And it allows us processing time, which I don't think that we get enough in learning. I don't think we get enough time to process, especially these big philosophical concepts. So yeah,